Midsommar is a 2019 horror film written and directed by Ari Aster, and you probably know his name from his directorial debut of 2018, Hereditary, which, if you've seen it, you know that it was downright terrifying and stands as perhaps the scariest film that I've ever seen, up there with The Exorcist and many iconic classics. So that was a pretty good directorial debut for Ari Aster, and now we have his second feature film, Midsommar, which tells the story of a girl named Dani who has just suffered a very strong loss in her family. And then she decides to go with her boyfriend and some of his friends on a trip to Sweden in order to get away from this life that she has in America and kind of take a vacation, if you will, with her friends. Her friends are kind of doing this for a few different things, their thesis in college, and they're just trying to go on a fun vacation to Sweden. So you have a lot of different elements at play there. And if you've seen the trailers, then you know it looks downright unsettling. And this movie feels like it's very heavily based off of the 1970s film The Wicker Man. I have yet to see that film, but it takes a lot of different nods from that, and also the remake with Nicolas Cage, which is an interesting choice to say the least. But regardless, you essentially have a story of people who are unfamiliar with the culture coming into a pagan ritual of sorts, the Midsummer or the summer solstice celebration that occurs every 90 years. And essentially, there are some dark things at play that are beneath the surface, because on the outside, these people in Sweden seem like a really kind group of people. But of course, as you all know, this is a horror film, and if they were all super kind and cuddly, there wouldn't be any horror. So of course, things get dark, and it takes time, because this is a rather long film. This is a 2.5-hour movie, and overall, I think it was pretty good. However, when you compare it to Hereditary, Ari Aster's first film, it definitely suffers in a few ways, and I want to talk about those today. I want to talk about the pros and the cons of Midsommar and explain to you what I thought about it. So, first of all, let's talk about everything great about Midsommar. The cinematography and the lighting and the camera work, everything technically was amazing. The audio was great. There's a lot of quiet scenes in the movie, but it all plays to the creepiness and the emotions of the characters. All of that was fantastic, and Ari Aster still proves to be a great director, and he knows how to make a scene seem so sinister even when nothing's being shown at all. He did that in Hereditary, and he continues to do it in Midsommar, and he has real passion for film and for telling these stories in a creative way, and I will always be there to support his next film because he has a passion for it, unlike a lot of studios which just kind of put it out for profit. But regardless, amazing in terms of its technical aspects. I also think this movie is a little light-hearted, a little bit more so than Hereditary. Hereditary is a great film, don't get me wrong, but it's very hard to watch because it is so dark and so heavy on its emotional beats. This film is a lot lighter. The characters crack jokes quite a bit, and they have some awkward dialogue. Makes it a little more fun and entertaining to rewatch if you were to rewatch it again. And I think there's a good mystery at play. You don't completely know what's going to happen. You don't see a lot of things. And then finally stuff starts hitting the fan and you start to figure out really quickly that something is wrong. With that being said, though, there are some negatives to this film as compared to Hereditary, because I do think, in my opinion, Hereditary is a better film. I think this film really lacks in its story. You start off with this really unique concept of this girl going through a trauma, which does feel like Hereditary in many ways. But then, of course, she goes off to Sweden with her friends, and you think that somehow this story is going to be brought back up and used in the advantage of the cult to get what they want from these tourists. But it doesn't really happen, and it very quickly strays away from that original plot and goes in a different direction. That is, yes, unexpected, but when you think back to it, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And to me, that was a little bit disappointing because Hereditary was so neatly compacted and so woven together in a great way that everything kind of played off, every action played off the other action. But in this film, things just kind of happened for random reasons, and I wasn't a big fan of that. I also think some of the characters kind of came and went a little too quickly. Some characters we see 1 minute, and the next minute they're no longer with us. Not trying to spoil anything, but we don't see a lot of characters very often, and I feel like they should have focused more on that than more so what they did towards the end, which I don't really want to get into too many spoilers, but let's just say there are some gratuitous scenes in this film, and I think you know what I'm talking about, wink wink, and I don't know, I feel like those could have been cut out. They weren't really necessary, and ultimately what I'm getting at here, and I don't know how to put it in the right verbiage, this film is a little bit too artsy. It's very artsy, it's very artsy-fartsy, it almost has a stick up its butt. And I don't want to sound like I don't love art, because I do. I think films are art, but films are also entertainment, and I think you need both of those to make a great film. Case in point, my favorite horror film, The Shining, is a very artistic movie, and it's shot beautifully, but it has a great story to go along with it, and I feel like Midsommar has the great artistic value, but it didn't have the story that's strong enough to carry that. Hereditary had both of those things, and that's why I think it was so highly praised, but Midsommar tends to fail when it comes to certain elements of its story that I would have liked to have seen more. I think the characters and the actors were really good. You believed in what they were going for, but there are certain things that happened throughout the story that didn't quite make sense for a lot of the characters, and I couldn't see them acting in the ways that they did. Another thing was kind of the cult's motivations. You kind of understood some of it, but not all of it, and some of the things just kind of happened for shock value, in a sense. And I wish it would have been more clean cut so you knew what was happening. In Hereditary, of course, you had the cult trying to summon Payman, the demon, and that made sense, and you understood why they were doing everything. But in this film, some of that was lacking, and I felt like if we would have understood that more and the motivations of these people, then the horror would have been a whole lot better. I also just flat out didn't find it as scary as Hereditary. It has creepy moments, sure, and there's some that should be praised, but overall I didn't get that sense of dread that I did from Hereditary, though it did give me a great sense of isolation, which I think was really strong towards the very end of Midsommar. Overall, I think Midsommar is a very good film. It's a beautifully shot film, but I think the story was a little lacking, and I hope for Ari Aster's next directorial film, he will focus more on the story and characters as much as he does with the great cinematography and lighting. With that said, I'm going to give Midsommar a 3 out of 5 skulls on the R.I.P. Reviews rating scale. I'm going to go into a little bit of spoiler talk right now if you want to hear it, but if not, check out Midsommar because it is worth a watch, but then come back and we can get into spoilers here. You've been warned. Thank you for watching.
Tomorrow's a big day.
Is it scary?
What is it?
It has special properties. What am I going through?
We just need to acclimate.
I don't want to acclimate, I want to go.
Absolutely not.
What's happening? I don't know why you invited us.
Alright, so, you've seen Midsommar, or you just don't care about spoilers, and we can talk about some of the things that happened in this movie. So, if you couldn't tell from the trailers, this is a film that is heavily based off of human sacrifice. We saw this in The Wicker Man, where a man is burned alive to save the, I believe, crops, or to have blessings on the island. And in the case of Midsommar, it's just about the same thing. They are sacrificing people in order to continue this cult in this little isolated area of Sweden. And some of the things, like I mentioned previously, were rather gratuitous in my opinion. You have the very drawn-out sex scene where, Christian has to impregnate this young girl. I understood that they were going for a very disturbed scene there, but I think it was dragged out a little too much and a little too gratuitous for my tastes, and I really didn't think it was necessary. We could have got the point across with seeing the situation and then cutting. I also think that the character choices made by Dani at the end didn't make a whole lot of sense. I know she was upset at her boyfriend, but I don't know why she was so adamant on basically murdering him. It was very silly to me. And the whole point of the ending didn't really add up to the rest of the story. We're never mentioned about her family again. We see Dani win this contest, and suddenly she becomes the queen, if you will, of their little colony. But if she would have lost, would the ending just not have happened at all? It was mind-blowing to me, some of these oversights that maybe I need to rewatch the film to understand. But again, it was a long film, and to catch all of these things is kind of difficult to do. So it needs to be fleshed out enough so you can understand at least the basic story upon a first viewing and get to the little details with a second or third, like I've done with Hereditary. So again, I'm not saying it's a horrible movie or anything, but those things kind of irked me, and I wish they could have been a little more fleshed out, a little more easy to understand, if you will. But there are some things I do want to touch on, spoiler-wise, that I thought were excellent. The practical effects and the way that they made the bodies in the movie and a lot of the gore stuff was really well done. It's not overly gory or anything, but they do them in a really great way, and the camera angles only add to this. My favorite sequence, I think, in the film is when the two elders jump off of the cliff and end their lives in a horrible way. It's a very disturbing scene, but it's done really well, and it's shot in a great way that makes it very disturbing, and you see the reactions of the people that aren't familiar with this practice at all, and it really shocked me because it's just so disturbing, but yet they had a reason for it, which made it all the more disturbing to think that they actually thought it was okay. So, Midsommar, it was good, but it wasn't as good as I thought it could have been in terms of comparing it to Hereditary, which I thought was so disturbing, so well crafted, and I wish this one could have been better. But when Ari Aster makes his next film, whenever that is, I will be there because he has a vision. He is working hard at these films, and regardless of the outcome, to see his passion at play is great, and I think he's one of the best in terms of modern horror directors and writers. And being someone who loves writing horror myself, I can appreciate people like him and what he's doing for the genre. Thank you guys for watching this review, and let me know, did you like Midsommar in the comments below. Remember, as always, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.